a mighty man, victorious in numerous battles, ascends to become a powerful king. Yet, he reincarnates into another life, carrying memories of his past existence, now trapped in the body of a helpless child. Nothing unfolds as he desires, and his body feels like a prison. In this new world, there are powers unfamiliar to him, powers he finds utterly fascinating. Now, he must gain strength as swiftly as possible. We see blood running down the blade of a sword against a backdrop of flames. Beneath a crimson sky, the man holding the sword appears to have slain a woman who lies lifeless on the ground. Subsequently, this same man tells us that he has become the king. Demonstrating unparalleled skill, he effortlessly destroys an opponent, proclaiming victory as he drives his sword into the man's body. At that moment, a fleet of warplanes crosses the sky and bombs an entire city, causing endless explosions followed by the terrified screams of the population. With each passing moment, the king watches the war-torn scene as his cape billows with the intensity of the bombs in front of him. According to him, he had become the most powerful king. Or rather, placing his hand on a showcase that held the crown he used to wear, the man laments that, in truth, he was once a king. Suddenly, he is thrown into his subconscious as if it were an ocean, where he dives and sinks as he lets his body be carried by its own weight. Amidst this, the voice of a child pleading please and a beautiful, green field appear. Then, a feather moves toward the warrior as we hear the child say, "In your new life, seek the light." Thus, the once king is reborn in the body of a child. The father is proud that the boy's hair color is the same as the mother's, while she is pleased to see that the son's eyes are identical to the husband's. The man welcomes little Arthur to this world and introduces himself as Reynold. Seeing the man's goofy demeanor, Arthur seems to have retained his old consciousness in the new body. Confused, he tries to understand who these people are until they both declare themselves his parents. At that moment, trapped in his old adult mindset, Arthur realizes he has just been born. Ironic as it may be, after a lifetime of battles and victories, he has been reduced to a helpless little child. Unaware of any of this, the mother pats the boy on the back to make him cough. And that's exactly what he does. Still not quite understanding what's happening, Arthur reflects that Alice and Ray seem to take good care of him, and both are convinced they really are his parents, whatever the reason may be. However, being a baby with an adult mind brings a persistent sense of fear. When he is placed in the crib, he ends up grabbing his father's finger, who is overjoyed to tell his wife. Frustrated, Arthur knows it was just a reflex action, almost instinctive, just like the cry he's about to let out, which was interrupted by a bowel movement replacing the tears. Definitely, his bodily functions are well beyond his control, and nothing happens as he plans, as if his tiny body were a kind of prison. Arthur tries to wake up, but the nightmare continues. As if that weren't enough, he would soon witness something even more absurd. Then, as he is carried out of the house in his mother's arms, the boy sees his father infuse his hands with magic and shatter a rock with a punch. A piece of rock falls on the big guy's head. Then Alice heals him with a magic spell. Observing this, Arthur reflects that there are powers in this world that he is unaware of, which is truly fascinating. Reynolds, with his gauntlet fused with magic, was capable of hunting even the fiercest wild boars in the forest. When he saw his father return from the hunt that day, the baby thought that knowledge was an advantage, so he scrutinized his surroundings carefully. For example, in this society, individuals may possess weapons, indicating a certain level of danger around that compels people to become strong as soon as possible. And Arthur himself does not wish to be an exception. Alice rocks the boy to sleep, and he ponders that these days have brought endless frustration. But moments like these aren't so bad, as, remembering tense moments in his past life where the opposition wasn't always loyal, he couldn't sleep so peacefully at any time. Regardless, the new life as a baby continues for little Arthur, and now he learns to crawl. At one point, he reaches a mirror in his parents' room and sees his reflection for the first time. The parents are thrilled with each discovery their son makes, while the kid is still trying to get used to his name. Although, for him, this isn't any serious issue. At bedtime, Alice kisses the little one after laying him out in the crib. However, unlike falling asleep, the rascal climbs down from the crib like Rapunzel from the tower of the castle to venture out. After all, after a long period suffering from his bodily impulses, Now he begins to better control his limbs and needs. While his mother washes the dishes, he crosses the kitchen stealthily, knowing he must make no noise. Upon opening a door, he completes his mission, reaching the bookshelf. After all, as he had thought, knowledge is an advantage, and now Arthur has found what he was looking for: information about this world. According to one of the books he picked up, this continent he was born on, Dicathan, is home to 3 kingdoms. Darv, an underground nation of dwarves. Ilenoir, a country of elves living deep within a forest. And lastly, Sapin, where Arthur is, the region controlled by humans and the most populous. Like his nation in his past life, it is a monarchy. But the difference is that the throne of this country is inherited, not taken. Moreover, this world still seems technologically outdated compared to his old one, and another book explained that this place was still primitive because of magic. In this world, there is a source of power called mana, and the ability to control this magical energy is largely hereditary, occurring in about 1 in every 100 people. In general, there are 2 forms of mana applications: amplification and conjuration. Amplifiers use mana to enhance their bodies, providing incredible strength, agility, and defense. On the other hand, conjurers are able to project mana to control it as they wish. The key to controlling mana is the mana core, and the power of magic awakens from the onset of puberty through late adolescence. Channeling the mana scattered throughout the body solely into the core, until you can control it, is what makes you a mage. Arthur is well aware of the principle of becoming conscious of his inner power until he can take control of it and then release it, and the center of his Kai is crucial for making this work. Luckily, the knowledge from the past life of the deceased king may be useful in his new existence, and that is what he tries to do as he begins a meditation that takes him to an empty space within his mind, where a fraction of mana is awakened and concentrated between his hands. However, suddenly, Alice arrives after searching the whole house for the troublemaker. Lovingly, she asks him not to scare Mom like that, but her smile falters when she notices something odd about her son. Arthur thinks she discovered his ability to use Kai, but she only realized that the baby had pooped. Faced with this, Arthur becomes even more convinced that his body is a prison and that he needs to gain more power. The next day, Alice writes in a diary that Arthur was born 2 years ago, noting how cute, curious, and good he is. However, it bothers her that he has never smiled. Outside the house, Ray teaches his son to use a stick as if it were a sword and convinces the boy that he has a knack for it. He calls his wife to take a look at the kid's moves, but Alice is not at all happy to see her darling little boy playing with such violent things. Speaking of 2 years of life, it was what Arthur needed to understand the power structure between this couple. Or maybe it's the case that women rule in this whole world. Later, the little boy is taken to the city. According to his mother, he always gets excited when he arrives at this place. Meanwhile, Arthur absorbs a lot of information to understand this world while walking in a busy area. For instance, by looking at the variety and quality of weapons, he can judge the level of technological advancement of the nation. Still, there are several substances that did not exist where he lived before, in addition to having the chance to personally observe magic, which is equally surprising and productive. On the way home, in the late afternoon, while sleeping on his mother's back, the baby thinks that this couple has met all his needs, and that although it is a limited life, it is not unpleasant. Because of this, he wonders if this is how a family functions, as this is something he never had the chance to feel. Anyway, this warm way of his mother is not at all bad. And speaking of affection, Alice points out that she is very happy when her son gets out of bed to read, or when his eyes sparkle when visiting the market in the city, and that he probably got that from Ray. Like him, perhaps Arthur also wants to someday go out to explore the world. Honestly, the mother would prefer to see the boy leading a peaceful life. When dawn breaks again, Arthur watches his father practicing and ponders that he is very lucky to have such an example to follow. After further shattering the rock he had already destroyed, Ray gives a thumbs up to his son and asks if he isn't amazing. The mother puts her hand on the boy's shoulder and comments that the show wasn't that big of a deal, but that now things are going to get better. That said, Reynolds throws a punch in the air that causes powerful gusts of wind. Additionally, by stomping on the ground, he causes a wave of wind that leaves his son awestruck. Definitely, Ray is an amplifier, and this gives Arthur even more desire to get his hands dirty and evolve his strength a bit. However, his mother is the natural obstacle to his learning, given that the son is just a baby and needs to take his afternoon nap at this time. Thus, Arthur does not give up and stretches his hand towards the bookshelf, making it clear he wants to get close. Alice denies the request and reinforces that it's time for the baby to sleep. But then he appeals to cuteness to get what he wants, and the strategy works. Upon grabbing one of the books, the boy feels like a great victor. As he starts meditating, he recalls that he acquired a variety of knowledge over these 2 years of life, and among them, the most valuable is knowing how to produce a mana core, accumulating in one point the countless fragments of magical energy scattered throughout the body. This task required a lot of effort and dedication, but it's finally paying off. By the way, upon gathering the last fragment, Arthur causes an explosion that destroys a good part of his house. Outside, Ray had shielded his wife from the debris, but ended up suffering a serious injury to his back. The two rush inside to see how Arthur is, and Ray reaches the sun first. He can't believe what he's seeing. After all, the boy is only 3 years old and is levitating above his own manifestation of mana as if he were a grown adult. With a sly smile on his face, Arthur assesses that his days of study have finally borne fruit, which is a great first step. However, parts of the wooden ceiling threaten to fall on the child's head, and the first thing he thinks is that he can't die now after what he just achieved. Finally, Alice dives to grab her son, while Ray uses all his mana-imbued strength to push away the wood that was about to crush his son. After being saved, the baby looks at his mother with sparkling eyes and decrees that indeed these two do everything to keep him safe, and that this is the role that parents need to play for their children. Ray asks how the boy is, and Alice responds in tears that he's fine, clutching the little guy as if he were the most precious thing on the face of the earth. Indeed, for her, he really is. Meanwhile, Arthur doesn't understand why the woman is crying. Recalling a moment from a past life, when he won an opponent in a duel in adolescence and saw the kid being consoled by his parents, the boy simply has trouble understanding, and that is something he certainly wouldn't learn from any book in this world. Soon, the boy himself starts crying and hugs his mother tightly. After this, we see a man being judged for his crimes. Although he had been a loyal servant, he attempted to take His Majesty's life, and according to the law, such an infraction is so severe that it would warrant immediate and harsh punishment. However, the council showed mercy towards the servant, allowing him to return home and face judgment there. In the presence of his wife and son, the man confesses his attempt on the king's life, but pleads that only he be sentenced, asking for his family to be spared. According to him, if he were to return to his home country now, a fate worse than death awaits all three. If this is what the man must face, let it be him alone. Thus, the offender implores King Grey to fulfill his wish. Speaking through one of the strange pillars in the room, a counselor states that the criminal was very reckless in his actions towards His Majesty, the light that guides everyone, who should not be bothered with such trivial matters. Consequently, the council decides to punish the entire family, and Grey ends the lives of the woman and child in front of the man. Witnessing the horrific scene, the counselors consider that the king doing this with his own hands is a sign of pure mercy, as the sovereign freed the two poor souls from eternal suffering. Finally, just like the pillars, the family man also thanks the monarch. Returning to Arthur, he receives from the king gauntlets identical to his own. The man was all excited as he handed the item to his son, but the kid seemed more interested in the wooden sword he already had. Pondering alone, the child reflects that if he had to use such a weapon with a child's body, he would die before the enemy could get within range. Regardless, he picks up a stick and calls his son to a duel. Arthur doesn't back down and delivers a sequence of attacks demonstrating great agility. After blocking each blow, his opponent activates a mana reinforcement that imbues the sword. To his surprise, Arthur does the same and shatters the piece of wood from the king. Seeing what he witnessed, the adult wastes no time and talks to Alice, saying it would be good for the kid to have a private mentor. In turn, the woman thinks this idea is absurd since her husband had already said he would train the son. That was what Ray truly wanted to do, but the truth is that the boy's talent is too great and needs a teacher equal to the task to guide him on the right path. Thus, Alice offers to teach magic to Arthur, but Ray argues that the boy's magic is a special case, as he cut a piece of mono-reinforced wood at 4 years old. From that moment, Alice realizes the gravity of the matter but insists on opposing this decision, not wanting to see her dear little boy go to some distant city. Ray asks her to think about their son's future, and she asks her husband to think about his present, because if Arthur leaves, the parents won't see him grow up. In the midst of this discussion, Arthur considers that there are times when emotions narrow a person's perspective, so he proposes a third option: everyone going together. Upon hearing this, the parents look at each other and open their mouths as if the kid had just reinvented the wheel, and then they rush to pack their bags. In the end, Arthur reflects that both have enough energy to act this way all the time. Hours later, in front of 2 carriages, the child's father tells him to introduce himself, and he announces himself as Arthur Lewin. On the other side, armed people gather near the Lewins' house. One of the warriors kneels before the kid and tells him they had met before, but that Arthur is too young to remember. However, Arthur remembers very well. These are the Twin Horns, the group that Reynolds and Alice were part of. The man leading is named Adam Crench, and one of the women, Angela Rose, grabs Arthur tightly as if he were a stuffed animal, and he ends up being saved by Durden Walker, who extends his hand for the young man to slap. Excluding him, atop one of the carriages, remained silent the mysterious Jasmine Flamesworth, and lastly, the pointy-eared archer introduces herself as Helen Shard. Soon, with everything ready, Reynolds orders the carriages to depart, and the journey finally begins. Without delay, Arthur notes how outdated this mode of transport is, very different from the ships that infested the sky in his last life. But he finds the carriage not so bad. The convoy is heading towards the city of Xyrus, but before they arrive, a problem occurs along the way. During a break for rest, the group is attacked by a pack of wolves. Arthur watches alongside his mother as the lupines attack Jasmine, who draws her daggers and ends the enemies in a movement that seems simple because it's so well executed. Then, Reynolds uses the gauntlet to punch another wolf, while Adam Crench drives his spear into another animal's chest. Helen shoots arrows that take down targets at a distance, making Arthur notice that the archer, Adam, and Jasmine are enhancers. On the other hand, being conjurers, Durden Walker conjures a powerful earth magic that shakes the battlefield, and Angela Rose wards off an opponent with a wind spell. Watching the spectacle, Arthur concludes that he needs to reach these guys' level soon. After the fight, the group decides to spend the night there. When the sun gives way to the moon, fires are lit for a meal. Ray tells his son not to hold back and eat whatever he wants. But the truth is that the boy isn't so used to the kind of food you eat when hunting in the middle of a journey. On the other hand, Alice stuffs herself until she becomes ill. By the way, she sees that her husband is injured and stands up to heal him. But before that happens, Helen, Jasmine, and Durden approach, and Alice had to wait for the archer to grant permission for the healing for some reason. Amid the restoration process, Arthur thinks that his mother appears to be a special type of mage, a broadcaster, with healing powers. Since this is so rare and valuable, it is not wise to heal people openly, as it would make her a target. By the way, Reynolds and Alice also live in the countryside for this reason, to hide this power. With the restoration complete, the husband thanks his wife. Then, Adam tells Reynolds he wants to do some exercise before bed. To everyone's surprise, the spearman asks to borrow Arthur. Coinciding with the training, Arthur notices the adult showcasing his weapon and doubts it's just a workout. But since he's already there, he has no choice but to join in. When Adam imbues his spear with mana, the child notices the man isn't going to go easy, so he does the same as his rival, but with more intensity, also casting a greenish buff on his legs that impresses Adam. Even at 4 years old, Arthur displays extraordinary speed and manages to surprise his opponent by appearing behind him. However, despite putting him in a vulnerable position, the child loses his balance in the step and forfeits the positional advantage. Nonetheless, the two engage in an open duel until the spearman conjures a skill that flings the youngster into the air. While Arthur laments his body is too light for this fight, Angela prevents his fall with wind magic. After the duel, Durden and Helen complain that Adam was too rough on the boy, but the spearman insists Arthur is a relentless little monster. On that note, he wants to know what kind of training or weird juice the father gave to the child. But Ray responds that he never did anything. In fact, in the midst of this, Jasmine suddenly appears in front of Arthur, asking him to teach her how he pulled off that move. Arthur knows that It's the eyes of someone who won't give up until they get what they want. By the late afternoon of the following day, the little boy surveys his cart and concludes that the journey has been quite smooth. The next day, the convoy takes another break, and Arthur uses the opportunity to evolve his body and mind in certain aspects, receiving training from the adults there, each contributing with their specific skills. Moreover, just as he learned, he feels a tremendous honor to share the knowledge of his past life with the dagger girl. Focusing his body, the boy conjures the greenish buff he used in the fight with Adam and shows the speed achievable when you are armed with this power. At night, the 4-year-old lights a candle to read a book in front of Jasmine. After that, he stops to eat something as usual, but something unexpected happens. As dawn breaks again, Jasmine thanks the little boy with a dagger tied with a rope as a gift, knowing that today is his birthday. Watching the scene closely, the other women find it incredible that Jasmine finally made friends with someone, which is very difficult for her. At this point, the men call the rest to continue the journey, and Arthur sees his mother feeling ill with something, though she pretends nothing is happening. Finally, the convoy resumes its journey towards Xyrus, but at a certain part of the route, it is attacked by a gang of thieves who have set up an ambush and shoot several arrows at the travelers. Angela uses her magic to repel some, but the situation is grim, as there are many enemies. Their leader demands that the women and children be kept alive to retain their value, while Arthur reflects that such people exist in any world. Soon, the group of bandits on the hill slides down the ravine towards the victims. Alice holds her son tight and promises to protect him. Durden launches a fireball that devastates the ravine, while Reynolds takes down several adversaries along the way with his martial techniques. Helen prevents an ally from being hurt by shooting an arrow into the heart of the bandit attacking him from behind, while Adam takes advantage of his spear's reach to hit targets in front of him. Jasmine, always the fastest, moves through the battlefield almost untouched. Arthur believes his allies form a more talented group individually, but that's not all that counts in a battle. Maintaining his devastating fury, Durden eliminates several opponents to save Angela Rose, but those thugs seem to swarm like ants in an anthill. No matter how many fell, 3 took their place. Thus, Arthur concludes that these guys' strength, as is quite obvious, lies in their numbers. Despite having shown great performance in the fight, Ray is thrown with force into one of the carriages and is temporarily out of combat. Alice and Arthur exit the stricken cart, but the family patriarch tells the two to get in, claiming his injury is nothing serious. Moreover, if the bandits learn of Alice's power, things would really get ugly, so Arthur must take his mother and flee. Outraged, the boy insists he is old enough to fight, so the father tells him to use that strength to protect his mother, as she is expecting another child. Upon hearing this, Arthur immediately understands why his mother had been ill those times. For this reason, he acknowledges his responsibility and buffs his feet again. As he approaches the Lewin family, the chief of the bandits orders his henchmen to chase after the child and the woman. At the same time, Ray attacks the man with all his strength and, although weakened by injuries, still manages to drag the enemy across the ground and halt his advance. Meanwhile, Arthur and Alice are caught off guard by a pair of thieves who had placed themselves in their path. But Jasmine and Adam kill the two to clear the passage, just as Helen covers the child and mother from a distance with her bow. As he runs desperately, Arthur reflects on the irony of life. He, who took everything from others in his former self, now flees so that others do not take everything from him. Remembering how he acted in his past life, the man in the child's body wonders if this is what karma is. Eventually, during the escape, a wizard from the gang of thieves casts a spell on Arthur and Alice. The child pushes his mother to save her and absorbs the entire impact alone, falling from the cliff. With that, Arthur draws the dagger he received as a gift from Jasmine and vows to take his assassin with him to the beyond. As he throws the knife, the rope wraps around the enemy's leg and pulls him down. Durden and Angela rush to prevent the child's fall with magic, while Alice screams her son's name, who by then was too far away to be saved. As he falls, Arthur reflects on the strange fact that he hasn't gained anything, yet he feels fulfilled. Now, he finally understands what that man was pleading for when he begged for his family's life, and why Alice seems to be crying so much. To save their family, both she and Reynolds do not hesitate to sacrifice themselves, and the mere thought of never seeing someone they love again brings them to tears. In a way, it's a mix of joy and sadness, and that's what Arthur feels as he grasps the idea that he was about to gain a little brother. Without a doubt, it would have been wonderful. Hours later, as night falls in the forest where the convoy was attacked, Arthur lies fallen and unconscious until he finally awakens and, still groggy, tries to understand where he is. At that moment, very heavy footsteps could be heard nearby, and the ground shook as they approached. Without delay, a colossal and fearsome creature faces Arthur and, for some reason, bids him good morning by name, as if the two knew each other. Meanwhile, in a magical and indecipherable realm, a little girl says she found something beautiful, something she probably won't come across a second time. Another girl replies that bad things are bound to happen. Back to Arthur, his face was twisted in terror. Trying to keep his composure, his adult mind wondered what that creature was, and what he himself was doing there. Maybe, thinking he was the same as in his past life, the little boy charges at the monster only to be swatted away like a mosquito. The older, feminine voice from the mystical realm speaks again, this time through the giant beast. She tells Arthur he still has a long way to go, and that she's actually on his side. With that said, the creature walks over to a fruit tree and picks several pieces, offering them to the boy, guessing he wants to heal. Arthur tries to move, but his body is badly injured, his movements barely functional. The creature tells him he should consider himself lucky to even be alive. But if he doesn't eat the fruit, she won't answer a single one of his questions. So, the boy devours one of the fruits and immediately asks how his parents are doing. The creature says she can't leave this place, but she can see a bit beyond its walls. Then, she reveals a glimpse of the bloody battle that had unfolded. Still, she assures Arthur that his mother and father are safe. They managed to escape a few days ago. The news that they're both alive overwhelms Arthur. A single tear runs down his cheek as he expresses just how happy he is. Not quite knowing who to thank, he's soon introduced to the beast's named Sylvia. Inside that strange shell, the younger girl asks what she should do now. Sylvia explains that the answer is right there. Days passed since Arthur had been rescued by the creature. Since yesterday, his wounds had healed, and all he wanted now was to go home. But that wasn't going to happen just yet. According to the monster, they were near the outskirts of Elshire Forest, a place crawling with wild animals and outlaws. Still, Sylvia had come up with a way to get Arthur out of there. In a conversation with the boy, she realizes he wants to leave right away. But she tells him that opening a dimensional portal takes some preparation. Bored, Arthur picks up a stick from the ground and starts swinging it around like a sword. Sylvia chuckles, saying it's good to move the body around and that kids should always stay active and healthy. In the middle of his training, the boy reflects on how Sylvia had never spoken about herself. If she had been fighting something before, he has no clue. And yet, despite her terrifying appearance, she seems kind. After practicing, Arthur takes a moment to meditate. His aura flows through his body and Sylvia is stunned to see such a young boy already possessing a mana core. Curious, she gathers magical energy into her hand and asks Arthur if he's capable of doing the same. The boy just stares, stunned. The creature then asks if he knows what she's doing. He replies that she's gathering mana while casting magic. Internally, he likens the action to a plane refueling midair. Sylvia points out that people often have a rigid idea of what mana is. They separate the act of gathering mana from the act of using it. But other races don't think that way, especially mana beasts, who do it naturally, like breathing. Then, she asks if the boy would like to have that kind of ability. Seeing his excitement, she presses further, what would he do with such power? After all, he'd be immensely strong. Arthur takes a while to respond. He thinks back to all the people who protected him in this second life. And then, with resolve in his voice, he declares that he will bring destruction to anyone who dares to take away what is precious to him. Without missing a beat, Sylvia flicks him on the forehead so hard that he bounces like a ping-pong ball. She tells him he failed the test. Frustrated, Arthur protests, it's only natural to want to destroy your enemies. That's exactly what he did in his past life. That's how he rose to become the most powerful king of his time. But Sylvia isn't impressed. She points out that he's corrupting his mind with thoughts of ending other people's lives. Then, she pauses, maybe she hit him too hard. But the boy insists he's fine. Sylvia reminds him that her hands could easily crush him. But they could also be gentle. so she asks which would he prefer. Naturally, Arthur chooses the gentle touch. Sylvia agrees. After all, anger and hatred burn quickly and often lash out as violence. Maybe it feels good in the moment, but those feelings always end in hate, nothing more. She tells him that she didn't save his life so he could use it for something like that. Hearing those words, Arthur starts to wonder if that beast somehow knows everything about him, even though that should be impossible. Sylvia then returns to the original question. What will you do when you have that power in your hands? Again, Arthur recalls memories of his time with friends and with his parents. With determination in his eyes, he says he wants to protect the people he loves. Sylvia smiles. That, she says, is the perfect answer. Meanwhile, not far from them, a beast of the same kind as Sylvia prowls the perimeter, vowing not to let her escape. In the next scene, we're taken into a memory from Arthur's past life. As he walks down the corridor, the servants bow their heads to the great King Grey, who steps into a room where a lord appears surprised by his majesty's arrival. Immediately, the man expresses his gratitude for such an honorable visit. But Grey reflects inwardly he was king only in name. Back then, political power rested entirely with the parliament. The nation's resources were drying up, birth rates were declining, and all that remained for the king was war. He had become nothing more than a killing machine. The old man praises Grey, saying his many victories brought wealth and glory to the people. But setting that aside, he humbly asks what brings the sovereign to his door. Gazing at the paintings on the wall, Grey turns to leave and informs Marlon that he is going to abdicate the throne. Sometime later, the royal crown lies shattered on the floor, and the king's sword planted into the ground like a stake. Now in his second life, Arthur begins to learn how to control a power that few will ever even lay eyes on. Sylvia tells him that, once mastered, the possibilities of this technique will be limitless. In the middle of it all, the boy tries to stay focused, sweating as he struggles to keep calm and do what needs to be done. In his previous life, there were many things the great King Grey didn't have, though there was one thing he craved above all to keep winning: control over Kai. In one brutal battle against a massive beast, after landing a hit, the monarch watched as his sword became engulfed in that powerful energy. Now, all these years later, and strangely enough, Arthur seems to have luck on his side. Still very young, he manages to gather the magic needed to complete the exercise his teacher assigned. With a smile on his face, he's suddenly hit by a powerful blow and thrown behind a few rocks. Sylvia quickly tells him to stay quiet. Doing his best to remain hidden, the boy spots a monster one that looks just like Sylvia. She seems startled that this other being managed to find her. The male creature explains that he was drawn by the smell of blood and orders Sylvia to come with him. She refuses, which forces him to turn to violence to get what he wants. Without hesitation, he conjures a dark force and launches it toward her. Sylvia manages to absorb the impact, but the magic still takes a toll on her body. She drops to her knees in pain, and Arthur looks on, deeply worried. The male warns her that pushing herself like this will only shorten her lifespan. Sylvia throws the warning right back at him as she summons an aura so intense, it causes her body to crack and shatter, completely leaving behind only the power of her spirit, now taking the form of a magnificent winged creature. Like a dragon, Sylvia unleashes a torrent of magical energy upon her foe. He roars back, promising she'll pay dearly for using that kind of power. But she doesn't care. She's already lived a good life, even if she wishes it could have lasted longer. With great effort, the enemy manages to shake off the spell and causes the entire cave to tremble. Without wasting time, he conjures a disturbing number of magical spheres and hurls them at his rival. After the attack hits, Sylvia looks around anxiously, searching for Arthur. Her opponent questions why she's acting that way. Not letting up, the male monster sends another magical sphere her way, but Sylvia responds instantly with a technique that freezes time itself, leaving only her and Arthur untouched by the effect. With time paused, she calls Arthur out and tells him she had to use her power, but more importantly, she asks if she looks more like Sylvia now. Confused, Arthur asks if she's a dragon, and the creature explains that that's what humans call her species. She then opens a dimensional portal and apologizes, saying the exit isn't as close as she thought it would be. Still, everything will be fine. She's already taught Arthur everything he needs to survive. Before he goes, she asks him again what he intends to do with the power he now possesses. He responds with certainty, he'll protect the people he loves. At that moment, Arthur notices how badly hurt his friend is. But before he can say anything, she cuts him off and gives him a few parting gifts. An egg, which must be wrapped in a feather and taken care of with great care, and a mysterious mark that now covers his arms. However, the beast doesn't explain the purpose of the mark, she simply assures him he'll understand it when the time comes. At last, Sylvia tells him it's time to say goodbye, even though the boy is visibly shaken by the thought of parting with his dear companion. She confesses that she could have sent him back home a long time ago, but the truth is, she didn't want to. She enjoyed living by his side during this time. Sad, Arthur asks if there's no way he can protect Sylvia with his power. After all, he was given this strength, and he promised to protect the ones he loves. But Sylvia explains that what's happening now was inevitable, so that promise doesn't apply here. The calm, matter-of-fact way she said it surprises the young boy. He wonders if it's the gratitude he feels for her that's making everything hurt so much. Maybe the time they spent together has changed him forever. And then, through tears, Arthur says that he doesn't care if Sylvia is a dragon, she's like family to him. Sylvia reminds him that he already has a mother, but when Arthur says she could be his grandmother, the creature's eyes widen with emotion. Pretending it's nothing, she softly asks him to call her that again. The boy repeats the word, and it makes a single tear fall from the dragon's eye. She then gently pushes Arthur toward the egg and feather so he can grab them and enter the portal. Just as he's about to fully step through, Arthur turns back and begs Sylvia to come with him, but it's too late. The portal's magnetic pull of mana has already dragged the boy in and made him vanish. Now alone, Sylvia takes one final breath and releases her hold on time, allowing it to return to normal. At that very moment, the enemy's magical sphere strikes her directly and throws her to the ground. He mocks her, saying she's finally decided to stay quiet. But then, noticing the pool of blood forming around her, he starts to worry he may have overdone it, even though he doubts someone like Sylvia could ever be killed by such a weak attack. And he's right, Sylvia is still alive. Playing dead to lower his guard, she unleashes her magical torrent straight at him. The force is so overwhelming that a massive explosion fills the entire cave and can be seen from a great distance, its scale enormous. Inside Sylvia's mind, she wonders if it was enough. A younger voice responds it was. With that, the elder leaves the rest in her companion's hands, who promises to take care of everything. Meanwhile, Arthur was crossing through the portal. Sylvia spoke to him telepathically, asking if he remembered what she had told him. When he confirmed, the dragoness assured him that he was going to be just fine. Even so, Arthur couldn't help but feel that the whole situation was incredibly sad. Sylvia agreed, reminding him that the world is, by nature, a place filled with sorrow, but that it's still possible to turn all those negative feelings into happiness. Arthur shouted that he wasn't capable of doing that, but his friend calmly told him it was okay if he couldn't do it yet. What mattered was taking one step at a time, little by little. That's all she wanted for him. After all, she knew he could do it because he had once been the strongest king she had ever known. Hearing those words, the boy froze, confused by how she even knew that. But Sylvia simply asked him not to let his heart be consumed by hatred or anger, but by light instead. And hearing that, something began to click inside him. Arthur started to believe that Sylvia might have been the one responsible for a very important moment in his past. Suddenly, he found himself lying in the exact same position he had been in when he first met Sylvia. His eyes welled up with tears as the truth hit him. Then, quietly, he got up and placed the gift, the egg, inside his bag. Just then, a sound echoed nearby. Immediately, Arthur uses his muscle enhancement to reach the top of a tree. From there, he notices that the egg he had received was vulnerable. He zips up his bag to protect it, then leaps from branch to branch until he encounters a group of bandits who had attacked a carriage and were taking a young elf maiden prisoner to sell her as a slave. Witnessing this scene, Arthur instantly remembers being attacked by that gang a few days ago. When the elf is thrown into the carriage to be taken away, his anger surges. He recalls how Sylvia had refused to teach him her powers because of his violent rhetoric. With this in mind, Arthur vows not to let negative emotions take over. He then pursues the stolen carriage to a camp the bandits had set up as night began to fall. One of the bandits remarks it would be a pity to sell the little girl without having some fun first, setting off alarm bells for Arthur. Regardless, he decides to wait patiently in a meditative state to act at the best possible moment. As night falls, Arthur observes the horned wolves and wonders why they obey these people without resistance. He then notices they are restrained with magical collars that make them docile. Arthur throws fruits from a tree at one of the wolves, angering them and causing a commotion that the gang at the campfire hears. To silence the wolves, one of the accomplices resorts to indiscriminate violence. Seizing the moment, Arthur defeats this man using his mana as if it were a blade. With the enemy down, he steals his weapon and sees the second man approaching to investigate the delay. Without hesitation, Arthur swiftly ends the second man and notes how exhausting it is to fight with a child's body. The third man approaches to check on the delay of his accomplices and is swiftly cut down by Arthur, severing his leg instantly. Though still alive, the bandit warns his fourth comrade that the intruding boy is a mage. With this information, the henchman reveals his own mana and shows that he too can use magic. Moreover, he expresses a desire to keep Arthur alive since a child wizard would fetch a higher price than the elf they captured. The bandit attacks Arthur, who quickly dodges and retaliates with a flying kick, but misses his target. In turn, the young boy throws his dagger tied to a rope at the opponent, but the bandit catches the weapon mid-air, thwarting Arthur's plan. Vulnerable, Arthur is thrown to the ground by a powerful kick and grabbed to be taken away, but he retaliates with a touch of fire on the attacker's knee, setting him ablaze for a brief moment. Enraged, the bandit decides he no longer wants to capture the boy alive. Now, he is determined to sell him to those collectors of bizarre bodies. However, seizing on the adversary's anger, Arthur throws the dagger with a rope again, hitting the target's forehead and killing him instantly. Seeing the young mage approaching, the third surviving element begs to be spared. Then, Arthur recalls that the young girl had also pleaded for mercy from the man, but he does not remember him having listened to her. Thus, Arthur finishes off the bandit and enters the carriage to remove the blindfold from the captured young elf. For a moment, he sees the elf as if she were someone else, but with no time to ponder on it, he decides to take the girl out of the vehicle and tells her she is free to go. The elf asks if the human is hurt, and Arthur shows a wound that would definitely make a child of his cry. Putting that aside, he reflects that this is the first time he's seen someone his age since he was born in this world. Finally, he covers the bodies of the bandits with blankets, claiming that it's not something a child like the elf should see. The girl responds that the human is also a child, leaving him without an answer. She wants to know what happened to the guys who kidnapped her, so the boy lies that they were involved in an accident, but that everything is now fine. The next thing Arthur does is gather the girl's belongings and remarks that it was fortunate he arrived in time. Hearing this, she blushes and grabs the boy's hand. While saying nothing, she hopes her expression conveys that she cannot be left alone because she is afraid. Arthur assures her that the guys won't bother her anymore. Then she thinks to herself, this kid must be crazy to leave a girl this pretty alone. Honestly, Arthur thought that a forest like this should be safe for an elf, but she corrects him, saying her parents once mentioned that a child elf could be eaten remorselessly by a ghost tree. Hearing this, Arthur asks which direction she came from, and she points randomly, actually in the opposite direction from where she arrived. To rectify the situation, he inquires how far she is from home, but she also has no idea, as she was chasing insects and got lost. Arthur concludes that this individual is not very rational, but supposes that children are generally like that. Lilac, he remembers himself when he was a kid in his previous life, alone and abandoned in a cell, and decides he will not leave this girl alone. The issue is that he has no idea how to control the horned wolves and imagines it would be better to spare them the pain, but the elf suggests they just be released. Arthur worries they might attack, but she assures him that the animals were only being used by those bad people and have no intention of being aggressive. Moreover, the forest people cherish life. With that, she releases the animals, and they leave without causing trouble. After that, the pair walks through the forest until dawn. During a break, Arthur asks the companion her name, and she introduces herself as Tesha Iralith. After saying his name, Arthur Lewin serves her some soup, imagining she might be hungry and in need of sustenance for the long journey ahead. His own remark reminds the boy of the fruits Sylvia offered back in the cave days. Indeed, Arthur is beginning to sound like Sylvia. Tesha confesses that the food smells odd, and Arthur explains that it's just boiled dried meat with a bit of salt, which probably would have tasted better with some herbs. Faced with the elf's grimace at the meal, Arthur reflects that he has always seen food merely as a means to obtain nutrition. Tesha admits she would love to have some sweets, and Arthur concludes that this child is a model of childlike behavior. She asks why he came to Ulster Forest, and he mentions that he lost track of his family, which makes the elf feel a connection, as she too is lost. Arthur inquires about life in the land of the elves, and she shares that it's fun in Elenoir. Since her parents are very busy, she spends a lot of time with her grandfather and caretakers. Soon, the journey proves to be much longer than Arthur expected. So far, there's no indication of Elenoir's location. At one point, Tesha becomes surrounded by numerous insects which, according to her, are common in her homeland for marking trails. Tesha places an insect on Arthur's ear pretending it's an earring, and he discovers that this is how children play, as he never had the chance to be a child himself. During their walk, Tesha excitedly talks about how, when her mana awakens, she will train at her master's house. Arthur asks if there isn't a school system in her land, instead of a private mentor, but the elf has no idea what he means by that. Meanwhile, a horned wolf lurks in the forest, and Arthur is aware of it. When night falls, this animal begins to howl, and the boy believes he should have killed the wolf to prevent a possible attack at dawn. Arthur tells Tesha to rest in the tent while he keeps watch outside for a while. Alone, the human tries to understand what Sylvia intended by giving him that egg. Later, Tesha can't sleep, so she even remembers her grandfather telling her never to sleep with any boys, but she's willing to keep a secret about Arthur. Nonetheless, he isn't sleepy and insists she try to sleep again. Still worried, the elf argues that if the boy stays outside, some bandit will notice there are children there, which could bring trouble. Realizing that's not what the girl meant, he asks if she's afraid of ghosts, and she pretends she isn't, arguing that she's just concerned about their safety, so it's best if the human keeps watch inside the tent. After her insistence, Arthur eventually enters, and Tesha continues to pretend she isn't scared, but asks that the boy not leave the tent without telling her, and asks him to accompany her to the bathroom when needed. With everything calmer, Tesha mentions that Arthur must be from the human kingdom, and she heard from her grandfather that the men there are perverts and have many wives. Arthur asks if the girl even knows what perverted means, but she thinks she doesn't. When he explains that it's mostly the aristocracy that tends to have more than one wife, the girl is practically asleep, until she finally drifts off. Curiously, Arthur feels this must be what having a sister is like. Hours later, day begins to dawn, and the two are sleeping inside the tent. After they pack up, the journey continues, and Arthur feels that Tesha has gotten used to him, and seems to have forgotten the men who attacked her. Truth be told, the boy was worried about his family, and not being able to go after them soon was frustrating. But something unexpected happened and changed his perspective. Suddenly, from his mana core, an unbearable pain surges through the boy. Tesha runs to pick some plants that might alleviate the pain, and as he is suffering too much, Arthur cannot stop the girl from entering the dangerous woods alone. As time passes, the pain doesn't improve, and the intervals between the bouts get even shorter. To make matters worse, the horned wolf appears in front of him with a piglet in its mouth. Tesha arrives shortly after with a medicine for stomach pain, and Arthur tells her to stay away from the wolf. However, the wolf lays the pig on the ground and leaves without showing any hostility. Seeing this, Tesha believes the animal might be grateful for having been set free. When the moon takes over the sky again, the pair set up another campfire to spend the night and feed on the pig left by the horned lupine. Tesha mentions she didn't find medicinal herbs, but she found mushrooms that might be useful, as they are so nutritious that the women in Elenoir always eat them. Excited about this, Arthur even eats the mushrooms, but then spends the entire night spraying the trees and cleaning his rear with leaves. As bedtime approaches, the human's eyelids begin to weigh down, while Tesha says that the elves always tell stories at bedtime, stories about the human kingdom and the nation of dwarves. The elf has always wanted to visit these places, but thinks there are too many bad people there. In fact, the people of Elenoir tend not to trust outsiders because of this, especially humans. When she finishes talking, Tesha realizes that Arthur has fallen asleep, so she covers the boy with a blanket and concludes that she is the more grown-up of the two. When morning arrives, the pair set off once again for the hike, and Arthur Lewin suffers from stomach pain and also in his monocore. Unfortunately, as he himself knows, children are too weak for journeys as harsh as these. Tesha pauses to point out that the two of them have become quite close over the days, so she asks if it's okay to call the human Art, as if they were friends. He says it's fine, but as the girl complains that his response was too dry, he says the following sarcastically. For someone from the countryside and of humble origin like me, being called so affectionately by Lady Tesha Iralith is an honor I am unworthy of. Tesha complains that his jokes sound like they're from an old man, and he retorts that he doesn't want to hear that from a crybaby who can't even go to the bathroom alone. The elf gets annoyed with the boy's behavior, especially since she was just starting to think of him as a friend. The word friend brings back horrible memories for the human, but he lets it go for now. Soon after, the two reach a portal that makes Tesha happy, as they have finally arrived. She walks up to the passage and reaches out her hand to her friend, whom she now calls Art. They then step through the portal and arrive in Lenoir, a majestic elven city nestled in the forest. Tesha is accustomed to the place and lands gently on the territory, but Arthur seems to have crashed to the ground. At that moment, a battalion of elves approaches after being alerted by the use of teleportation in the area, and the soldiers grab the human unceremoniously. Arthur cries out Tesha's name, asking her to do something, but strangely, she remains silent in the face of the aggression. Check out these videos appearing on your screen and subscribe so you don't miss the next part.